So you're probably familiar with the Stroop effect. Now, if you don't know it by name, you probably know by what it actually is, and I'll put it on the screen. Now, it's when a color is incongruent with the word that it's written in. So, for example, red written in blue, green written in yellow, and so forth. So the task usually is to call out the color of the ink of what you see, not what you read. This is an inhibition task that helps you with executive functioning because you have to plan out what tasks to do, color not word, or the inverse, word not color, which is the inverted Stroop. And then you have to make sure you say the correct. So detect the error, what's wrong, is it red or is it blue? And then you reinforce it by doing it right, or you reinforce it by saying, did it right next time. So that Stroop is probably the most popular, and it was made by a guy named John Ridley Stroop, so its namesake, and it's probably one of the most cited cognitive studies in psychology. Now, what I want to talk about today is a different type of Stroop. So let's talk about the numerical Stroop, because the color Stroop is probably the most common, but there's different types. There's the emotional Stroop. I have one I created called the double Stroop, but I want to talk about the numerical Stroop because it's not that popular. And there's different ways you can implement this. Now, the reason why any type of Stroop task is important, because like I said, inhibition or impulse control is a big part of what makes us human. Most animals, they act primarily on instinct. Now, the ones that have a larger frontal lobe, they definitely have more rationality, like the chimps, bonobos, dolphins. But to a degree, they still have limitations. So what this is training is the same region of the brain that reinforces correctness or error detection, meaning perceiving what's right, what's wrong, perceiving mental fatigue, goal set planning in the frontal lobe, the prefrontal cortex to be exact. These are important things we can train, and it builds these regions stronger, just like we would do with a muscle. So it's an applied way to train our mind so it can reinforce these habits in other contexts. So going to the numerical Stroop. This can be done in different ways. So the most common way is when you have a digit. So let's say the number 3 shown multiple amount of times. I'll put that on the screen. So if it's shown 4 3s, 2 on top, 2 on the bottom, the answer of that is 4. So you see how it's incongruent with the amount of digits shown. So the amount of each individual digit is incongruent with the actual digits. So a lot of people, they'll see it and they'll want to multiply it. So 3 times 4 is 12. That's not correct. We want to call out or answer the number based off how many digits appear. So the same regions of the brain have to process, say, what am I visually taking in? So that visual aspect, what am I processing, perceiving, and what am I doing? And then I got to make sure it's correct, or is it incorrect? Reinforce it to be better or correct next time. Now, another way to do the numerical Stroop is using the word. Now, this one might be a little trickier, or maybe it's a little easier depending on how your brain processes it. Because if you see the number 3, I'll use that again, and you see it written THREE, and you see it written 4 times, you say 4. Now, we're bringing a different language aspect to it, so we're working different regions of the brain now. And that's why it gets interesting when you do it from a more written sense versus the numerical sense. Our brain is a little more efficient at processing numbers, but adding that word aspect can maybe make it harder, or depending on the person, maybe make it easier. But the goal is, can we override it? Because how our brain works in general when it comes to any Stroop task is it's aligning the general perception of what our brain says what it should be. These automatic systems want to just do it. You know, we got to override it because they use things like, say, cognitive biases, where we want to get to point A to point B, and we have different schemas to close these gaps versus thinking 50 different ways. You just jump to the quickest, most readily available conclusion. And that's what Strooping does. Now, when you do it with the colors, it's a little more obvious that I can't describe red without actually describing an object, an apple, fire. Because if you just say red like this background, you can't really tell a person who's never seen before, a blind person, that, oh, red is like a fire or an apple. They've never seen that. So they have no context. And our brain wants to make context and reasonableness. But our brain knows what a house is, because a house has 4 walls, a roof, some windows, a door. It knows what an apple is. It's something you eat, but you don't know what it exactly looks like. So the context in that case is I can make sense of it, of what it does, its function, what it's used for, but I can't visually describe it. And that's why the brain's so intricate when you talk about like how the visual aspect of taking information, why our brain's wired so much for that. Now, going back to the numbers, try adding this into some of your training if you already do cognitive training, or you could write cue cards and have it written down and flash them to your clients, or you can use something like the apps we have, like Think Fast, where we use it with the digits, and we're working on getting more features with the word as well. And you can add different ways to invoke some kind of response and see from a mindset aspect, what was going through their head. If they messed up, oh, shoot. Use that to be able to calibrate their emotions. Because a lot of people get stuck on cognitive training being only about reaction time, decision making, the objective scores, which is great. We do want to have that. But all in all, you want to be able to see what are the dispositions, where's that lesser trained state where the client gets to. So using the numerical Stroop is just one of many. So this was meant to be just like a different way to look at things. And I want to do more episodes like this where it takes topics and just breaks down quickly and say, here's another way to do it. Obviously, we'll do more in-depth topics too, but make sure you try this out because it's another way to go with a classic cognitive training to get your mind right.